We'll now learn how to create our own data types that allow us to store more than one piece of information all in one variable. For example, we might have a student, and for that student we want to store their first name, their last name, their birth year, and their average grade. But instead of doing so in 4 separate variables, we'd like to do that in one variable. The language concept to do so in C is called a structure. And so to define such a thing, we type struct, the keyword struct, and then the name that we want to give that structure. So for example, I want to call that student. Then an opening curly brace, which is automatically completed by the closing curly brace right here. And then the elements of the structure. So for example, I want to store a first name, and that's an array of characters. So character, first name, and let's say you can have at most 30 characters. Then I want to have a last name, which is also an array of characters. And again, let's limit the length to 30 characters. We want to store the birth year, which is an integer. And finally, we want to store maybe some average grade, which, let's say it's a double. And that's it. We have now defined our structure. That's called student. In our main program, we can then use this structure by simply saying struct student. So this is how we call that new data type, struct student. And now we need to give a name for a variable, an instance of this new data type that we want to define. So let's say I call that me. So I want to define myself as a student. And I can initialize it right here in this step by putting an equal sign there, opening a curly brace, and then putting all the parameters in there. So a first name first, so in my case that's Petra. Then a last name, on for Taylor, and a birth year, I'm going to make that up, 1989, and an average grade, let's say is a 3.5. And so now I declared a variable named me, to which I can refer in the rest of my program. And me stores a name, a first name, a last name, a birth year, and an average grade. How do I access these components that are stored in there? Suppose I wanted to print the name of the student. So we would type printf. And let's say I want to actually precede that by typing out name. And I want to print the first name with a %s and a space and the last name with a %s, and then maybe start a new line. Now, how do I access the first name? I access it by typing the name of the variable, which is me, but I don't really know which component of the variable to print. I want to print the first name component, which I named up here when I declared my new data type. So I type me, then a period, first name. That refers to the first name component of the variable me. Similarly, if I want to access the last name of the variable me, I would type me.last name. And this will print the first and the last name out. Let's compile this and run this. So I'm going to run it step by step. And we see here the structure student me is declared. And it shows up in memory. I can see the average grade is a 3.5 all the way to the right in the memory visualization. And the birth year, 1989, next to that in the memory visualization. And when I move the memory strip over by grabbing it and just moving it over, I see Bonford Taylor stored in there. And if I move it further to the left, I see my first name, Petra, stored in there as well. Okay, and now we're going to print this out. And you see in the terminal window my name indeed appears, Petra Bonford Taylor, and the program terminates. So now similarly, we can print other elements of the variable me. Suppose I wanted to print the year of birth. Well, that's an integer, so I print that with a %d, and then start a new line afterwards again. And how do I access it? Well, the variable name is me. And if I wanted to print the birth year, I need to access the component birth year of the variable me. And finally, let's print the average grade while we're at it. Average grade. And that's a double, so we'll print that with a %lf. And let's print it most 2 decimal places so it doesn't get too long. And again, a new line afterwards. And we access that by going to the variable me and printing the component average grade. Okay, let's compile and run this step by step again. First, the variable me is declared and initialized. Then we're printing out the name, both first and last name. Next, we're going to print the birth year, 1989. And finally, we're printing the average grade, and the program terminates. So again, to declare a structure, we first put the keyword struct, then the name we want to give that structure. In order to later on declare a variable of that new data type, we have to type struct student. So 2 words, both the keyword and the name that we gave that structure. And then the variable name that we want to declare an instance of. Suppose I wanted to declare a second student. Struct student remains the same, but now the next word is the name of the variable of the next student. Let's call it U. And let's initialize it differently. Let's say this is Remy, Brock, and let's make up a birth year, 2005, and let's say his average grade is also 3.5. So now I have a second student. And so if I wanted to print out both of our names, so put names here, %s, comma, %s, and how would I refer to the second student's names? I would use the variable u, and then that first name, as well as u dot last name. Let's try that out. Let's compile and run this step by step. First of all, the variable me is declared, and now the variable u is declared. So if I move over in my memory visualization tool here, I see another variable that just appeared. So his birth year, 2005, and the average grade. And when I scroll further to the left, I see the characters of Remy Chirac appearing in memory. The next code instruction is to print out all names. First my first and last name, then his first and last name. Let's execute that. And indeed that shows up in the terminal window. So there we are. And then I just print my birth year and my average grade. So the variable name goes first. And next goes the name of the component of the structure that you wish to address. So first name, for example, or birth year, or average grade. So that remains the same regardless of which variable you're looking at, but what changes when the variable changes what goes in front of the period. So please go ahead and play with this code, make some changes, and see what happens so that you can start to familiarize yourself with structures.